Detective Ethan Pierce's sanctuary was his 40-foot sailboat, Sea Whisper, moored at Marina Cove. After grueling precinct cases, he yearned for salt air and gentle waves. That morning, coffee in hand, he savored calm, until an icy voice shattered the silence. HOA enforcer Karen loomed at the dock, clipboard raised, eyes blazing. Her sharp accusation threatened his peace, sending a quiet day careening into high-stakes drama. Comment where you're watching from, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Detective Ethan Pierce had always considered sailing his sanctuary. After long, arduous hours dealing with intense cases at the precinct, nothing relaxed him more than the gentle sway of his sailboat, Sea Whisper. It was a sleek, well-maintained vessel, docked at Marina Cove, a charming harborside community where Ethan had recently purchased a modest cottage. His new home overlooked tranquil waters, dotted with yachts and sailboats, reflecting his hard-earned success and dedication to public service. As Ethan was finishing his morning coffee on the deck of Sea Whisper, savoring the fresh marine breeze, his moment of peace was interrupted by an all-too-familiar voice. It belonged to Karen, the neighborhood HOA representative. Her tone was as piercing as it was unmistakable. She had gained notoriety among residents for her obsessive policing of trivial community rules and her incessant meddling in neighbors' personal matters. Karen took pride in her self-assigned authority, frequently patrolling the marina to spot minor violations that she believed tarnished the neighborhood's image. Ethan sighed, bracing himself for another pointless confrontation. He turned slowly, facing Karen, who stood defiantly at the dock's edge, her clipboard tightly clutched, as though ready for battle. Her narrowed eyes scrutinized his boat critically, lips pursed in obvious distaste. "Detective Pierce," Karen began sharply, "I've noticed your vessel is an unsightly presence in our pristine marina. The sails are too colorful, and frankly, it's lowering our property's aesthetic value." Ethan felt irritation bubble beneath his composed exterior but maintained his professionalism, offering a restrained smile. "Karen, I appreciate your dedication," Ethan replied patiently, "but Sea Whisper is fully compliant with the HOA guidelines. I've read the regulations thoroughly." Karen's eyes flickered momentarily, clearly annoyed by his calm confidence. "Nevertheless," she retorted, raising her clipboard as though it lent her greater authority, "many residents agree with me. This boat," she gestured dismissively at Sea Whisper, "is far too flashy. It doesn't reflect the community's standards." Ethan raised an eyebrow, trying to remain diplomatic. "Karen, Sea Whisper isn't breaking any rules. Perhaps you might reconsider the rigidity of your interpretation. After all, the marina celebrates diversity in vessels." She frowned deeply, clearly unimpressed with his reasoning. Shaking her head, Karen adopted a self-righteous stance, visibly puffing herself up. "Well," she said coldly, "we'll see what the HOA board says about this. Expect an official notice." With an abrupt turn, Karen marched away, heels clicking sharply on the wooden dock. Ethan watched her retreating figure, a blend of frustration and amusement playing across his face. He wondered briefly how a person could invest so much energy into such insignificant matters. Shaking his head, he decided to put the incident aside for the moment. He still had a peaceful morning ahead and wasn't about to let Karen's petty complaints disturb his much-needed relaxation. Returning to the serenity of his sailboat, Ethan began preparations for a leisurely sail, determined to reclaim his tranquility, unaware that Karen's obsessive tendencies would soon escalate dramatically, dragging him into a series of unexpected conflicts. Later that afternoon, Detective Ethan Pierce was tying off Sea Whisper after an invigorating day out on the open water, enjoying the golden hues of the setting sun reflecting off the tranquil marina surface. Just as he secured the final rope, the sound of Karen's determined footsteps interrupted his peaceful moment once again. Ethan felt a familiar sense of resignation as she approached with her ever-present clipboard. "Detective Pierce," Karen began sharply, not bothering with pleasantries. "I've consulted with several HOA members. We strongly believe your vessel detracts from the cohesive appearance of our community. To rectify this, I am formally offering to purchase your boat. $1 should suffice." Ethan stared incredulously at Karen, momentarily lost for words. "Excuse me," he finally managed, unsure if he had misheard. "Yes, $1, Karen repeated firmly, lifting her chin. "I am generously providing you an opportunity to correct your mistake. Consider it community service." Ethan chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Karen, you cannot seriously believe I would sell Sea Whisper for $1. This is my property, legally docked and registered. Your offer is frankly insulting and absurd." Karen's eyes narrowed, clearly displeased with his reaction. "You should reconsider," she said icily. "The HOA will not tolerate blatant disregard for community standards. You leave us no choice but to take further action." "Feel free," Ethan replied evenly, his patience fraying. "But understand that I will not entertain threats or ridiculous offers. Sea Whisper stays right here." With a scowl, Karen spun around abruptly, storming away with her clipboard clutched even tighter, visibly furious at being rebuffed. Part 3. 2 days later, Ethan returned home from the precinct to find Karen pacing anxiously near Sea Whisper. Her expression was agitated, eyes darting around suspiciously as she noticed Ethan's approach. "What now, Karen?" Ethan asked tiredly, not bothering to hide his irritation. Karen lifted her phone defiantly. "I've contacted the authorities," she declared. "You have stolen property here, and the police will address this issue." Ethan raised an eyebrow in disbelief. "You reported my own sailboat as stolen?" he asked incredulously. "You leave me no choice," Karen replied haughtily. "Your blatant disregard for our community's standards must be addressed." Moments later, a police cruiser pulled up, and 2 officers stepped out, approaching cautiously. "Good evening," Officer Daniels greeted carefully. "We received a report about a stolen vessel. Mind explaining?" Ethan sighed deeply, presenting his badge. "Detective Ethan Pierce. The boat, Sea Whisper, is legally mine. I have all documentation if necessary." Karen quickly interrupted, waving dramatically. "Don't listen to him. He's lying." Officer Daniels looked between them skeptically. "Detective, could you please show me the documents?" "Of course," Ethan replied, retrieving the paperwork. After examining it thoroughly, Officer Daniels nodded respectfully. "Everything checks out. Apologies for the confusion, Detective Pierce." He then turned sharply toward Karen. "Ma'am, false accusations are a serious matter. Consider this a warning." Karen sputtered indignantly, unable to form a coherent protest as the officers departed. Ethan smiled subtly, feeling a small victory but also recognizing that this conflict was far from over. A few days after the unsettling encounter with Karen and the police, Ethan was enjoying another peaceful evening aboard Sea Whisper. The marina was bathed in the soft hues of twilight, and Ethan allowed himself a brief respite from the rigors of his daily police duties. Yet his relaxation was abruptly interrupted when he noticed a shadowy figure near the stern of his boat. Approaching cautiously, Ethan quickly identified Karen, who seemed startled by his sudden appearance. Her eyes widened briefly before narrowing into a suspicious glare. "What are you doing here, Karen?" Ethan demanded firmly, his patience worn thin from their previous confrontations. Karen stiffened, clearly caught off guard, but she quickly regained her composure. "I was merely inspecting to ensure compliance with HOA standards," she retorted defensively. "At night?" Ethan questioned skeptically. "That's not part of your responsibilities." Karen's eyes darted nervously, her discomfort evident. "Someone must ensure rules are followed, Detective Pierce," she asserted, adopting an air of righteous indignation. "Your boat remains a topic of significant community concern." Ethan sighed deeply, frustration evident. "Karen, this constant harassment must stop. I've complied with every regulation. Continuing this behavior only damages your own credibility." Karen bristled visibly at his words, her pride clearly wounded. Without responding, she abruptly turned and walked briskly away, disappearing into the shadows, leaving Ethan uneasy and suspicious about her true intentions. Part 4. The following weekend, the situation escalated significantly. Ethan received a formal summons from the HOA board, demanding his immediate attendance at an emergency meeting. Irritated but resolute, Ethan made his way to the marina's community center, where the HOA board was already seated, flanked by Karen, whose smug expression immediately raised Ethan's guard. "Detective Pierce," began Harold Stanton, the HOA president, in a grave tone. "We've received multiple complaints, primarily from Ms. Karen here, about your continued violations concerning Sea Whisper. Specifically, concerns revolve around aesthetic compliance and alleged disruptive activities." Ethan frowned deeply, maintaining calm composure. "Harold, I've consistently followed HOA guidelines. Any allegations otherwise are baseless." Karen quickly interjected, voice sharp with accusation, "It's not just aesthetics. Detective Pierce has repeatedly refused my authority and threatened community harmony with his defiance." Ethan took a steadying breath, turning directly to face Karen. "These are serious accusations. Do you have concrete proof of such claims?" Karen hesitated briefly, her eyes flickering uncertainly, but then she defiantly waved a stack of papers. "I have numerous witness statements," she declared triumphantly. Ethan eyed her skeptically. "May I see those?" he requested calmly. Reluctantly, Karen handed over the documents. Ethan glanced through them, immediately noticing inconsistencies and vague complaints from individuals with known personal ties to Karen. "These statements are vague and biased," Ethan said firmly. "I insist on objective evidence." Harold exchanged uncomfortable glances with other board members, sensing the validity of Ethan's critique. Ethan continued steadily, addressing the entire board, "I've documented every encounter with Karen, including video evidence. It clearly demonstrates harassment directed at me personally rather than genuine community concern. I suggest reviewing this thoroughly before proceeding." A tense silence filled the room as the HOA members exchanged apprehensive looks, now uncertain. Finally, Harold spoke cautiously, "Detective Pierce, we'd appreciate reviewing your evidence. This meeting is adjourned pending further investigation." Karen paled noticeably, realizing her leverage was rapidly slipping away. As Ethan left the meeting, he felt confident justice would prevail but knew Karen would not relent easily. The following week, Ethan Pierce received another surprise. This time, it was a formal notice from the HOA board, demanding his attendance at an urgent meeting. As irritated as he was, he knew this was a battle he would have to fight. He was determined to stand his ground, this was his property, and he would not be bullied by Karen or anyone else. Arriving at the community center, Ethan found the HOA board already seated, with Karen standing at the front, clutching her clipboard. Her smug expression told Ethan everything he needed to know, this was more of her personal vendetta than any legitimate concern for the community. Harold Stanton, the HOA president, stood as Ethan entered and motioned for him to take a seat. The air was thick with tension. Karen's presence only made it more uncomfortable. "Detective Pierce," Harold began, "I trust you understand the gravity of this situation. We've received multiple complaints regarding your boat and, frankly, your general disregard for our community's standards." Ethan could feel his temper rising, but he managed to remain composed. "I've followed every rule laid out by this association, Harold," Ethan replied calmly. "Sea Whisper is docked legally, and all paperwork has been provided. This isn't a matter of standards, it's a personal issue from Karen." Karen stepped forward, her eyes narrowing at Ethan. "It's not personal, detective," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "This neighborhood was built on a certain aesthetic. That boat of yours sticks out like a sore thumb, and frankly, it devalues the property. I'm just trying to maintain some order." Ethan shook his head, frustration seeping through his voice. "Karen, the boat is not violating any guidelines. If it bothers you so much, perhaps it's a reflection of your own intolerance, not the community's standards. Karen's face flushed with anger, and she raised her clipboard as though it were a weapon. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You'll see." Ethan knew that he had to get ahead of this. He calmly reached into his bag, pulling out a folder filled with documentation, including photos, permits, and communication from the marina. He placed it on the table in front of the board. "I've done everything by the book," Ethan said firmly. "I even have video footage of our prior interactions, including Karen's constant harassment. I suggest you review this evidence before making any decisions." The room went silent as Harold and the others glanced through the documents. Karen's face grew paler with each passing second. She had underestimated Ethan, thinking she could bully him into compliance. But this was more than just a matter of a boat. It was about respect for his rights and the integrity of the community. Harold cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "We'll need some time to review everything, but this meeting is adjourned for now." As the meeting concluded, Ethan stood up, gathering his papers. He knew this wasn't over, but he felt confident that Karen's lies and manipulations were finally being exposed. Before leaving, Ethan shot a look at Karen, who was still standing there, her hands clenched into fists. He wasn't going to back down. Not this time. The following week, the situation took another unexpected turn. Ethan was jolted from his sleep when he heard a loud knock at his door early in the morning. He rubbed his eyes, wondering who could possibly be visiting at this hour. When he opened the door, there stood Karen, once again with that irritating clipboard in hand. "Detective Pierce," Karen greeted him, her tone filled with feigned sweetness. "I need to speak with you immediately. There's been a new development in the matter of your boat." Ethan sighed, already dreading the conversation. "What now, Karen?" "Do you realize," she began, "that your boat is still listed as a violation in the community's records? I've gone ahead and contacted the HOA legal team for further action." Ethan raised an eyebrow, his patience thinning. "You've done what?" "I've already given the board all the proof they need." "This is harassment, Karen. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." Karen's expression twisted, her faux politeness slipping. "It's not just your boat, detective," she hissed. "You're a disgrace to the community, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." Ethan knew he had to act fast. "You know what, Karen? You've taken this too far," he said firmly, stepping back into his house and grabbing his phone. He dialed the HOA president, Harold Stanton, and made it clear that this needed to end now. Minutes later, Harold called him back. "Ethan, I apologize for all of this. We've reviewed the situation. Karen has once again misrepresented the facts. We're taking immediate action to put an end to this. You have my word that your property is not in violation of any rules." Ethan thanked Harold and hung up. He then turned to Karen, who was still standing there with a smug look on her face. "You're going to regret this, Karen," Ethan warned. "You've pushed me far enough." The confrontation was over, for now, but Ethan knew that Karen's obsession with his boat wasn't finished. He was prepared for the next round. As days passed, the tension between Ethan and Karen reached its boiling point. Karen was relentless, still calling the HOA board, still spreading rumors, and still making his life difficult. But Ethan wasn't backing down. He continued documenting each interaction, determined to protect his rights. One afternoon, while sitting on his deck enjoying a rare moment of peace, Ethan saw Karen approaching once again. She was walking briskly, her eyes locked on him, and he could tell this time was different. She reached his porch and stopped, her expression cold. "I've had enough of your attitude, detective," Karen spat. "You think you can ignore me? You're breaking the rules, and now you're going to pay for it." Ethan stood up, facing her head on. "I've done nothing wrong, Karen. You can keep trying, but you won't win. You're making yourself look more ridiculous every time." Karen seethed, her hands trembling with fury. "You'll see. You're a disgrace, and I'm going to make sure you pay for this." Before Ethan could respond, Karen stormed off, but Ethan felt the weight of her threat. He wasn't going to let her tear apart his peace of mind, but it was clear that this battle was far from over. As he watched her walk away, Ethan knew he'd need to prepare for whatever Karen had in store next. The stakes were rising, but he was ready for whatever came next. After the altercation with Karen, Ethan Pierce knew that things had reached a boiling point. His patience was wearing thin, but he understood that confrontation could sometimes escalate things even further. He had to approach this carefully, ensuring that any misstep on his part could make him a target for Karen's continued vendetta. But Karen wasn't one to back down easily. It wasn't long before Karen returned with another barrage of complaints, this time more malicious than ever. Ethan had expected this, but the intensity of her attempts to control his life and harass him continued to surprise him. One morning, after a long night shift, Ethan returned home to find his mailbox stuffed with letters, many from the HOA. He grimaced as he sifted through them, but his attention was caught by one letter that seemed different. It was a formal notice from the HOA, demanding that Ethan attend yet another meeting about his property, which was now marked as a repeat offender, in violation of community rules. Karen had done her part to ensure that this complaint was filed, but Ethan wasn't about to let her get away with it. When the meeting took place a few days later, Ethan arrived at the HOA office, prepared for a fight. As he walked into the sterile conference room, he saw Karen sitting there, a self-satisfied smirk on her face. The other board members were present, their faces blank as they stared at him, clearly not wanting to get involved but forced to comply with Karen's influence. "Detective Pierce," Karen greeted him coldly, as if she were dealing with an unruly tenant. "We've had enough of your behavior. Your boat continues to be an eyesore, and you've repeatedly ignored the rules. We're recommending that you move your yacht out of the marina." Ethan's jaw clenched. "That's not going to happen, Karen. My boat is in full compliance with every rule. You've been harassing me for weeks now, and I'm done tolerating it. If the board has any legitimate concerns, let's address them, but this has gone too far." Karen's face flushed with anger, but she remained calm. "You can't just ignore the rest of us for your own benefit. It's about time you realized your privilege won't protect you here." Ethan's heart skipped a beat as Karen's words took on a sharper tone. He could sense her racial undertones, but he refused to let her provoke him further. "My privilege doesn't factor into this. It's about fairness. And your actions are now crossing into harassment," he said, making it clear that he wasn't going to let Karen manipulate the situation any longer. The HOA board members shuffled uneasily in their seats, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the meeting was going. The chairperson, Harold Stanton, attempted to diffuse the tension. "Let's calm down, everyone. We need to focus on resolving this. Detective Pierce, will review the evidence and give you a fair hearing." Ethan leaned back in his chair, unfazed. "You know where to find me when you're ready to do things the right way," he said, standing up and walking out of the meeting room without looking back. He had made his stance clear, and now, it was time to prepare for the legal battle that he knew would follow. It wasn't long before the community began to take sides. News of Karen's complaints had spread like wildfire through the neighborhood, with residents weighing in on the matter. Some took Karen's side, believing her exaggerated claims about the boat's impact on property values, while others sided with Ethan, recognizing the injustice of Karen's actions. Ethan kept to himself, focusing on his work at the precinct and keeping a low profile as the tension with Karen continued to build. But his resolve grew stronger as Karen's behavior became more erratic. One afternoon, while Ethan was out running errands, he received a call from his lawyer, Sarah Green. "Ethan, we've got news," Sarah said, her tone more urgent than usual. "Karen's filed a formal complaint against you again, claiming that you've been threatening her. She's trying to escalate this to a legal case." Ethan sighed, leaning against his car as he processed the information. "Of course she is," he muttered under his breath. "But she's crossing a line." Sarah continued, "I've reviewed her claims, and they don't hold up. The evidence you've provided, your documentation, the security footage from the marina, backs you up. We'll be ready for her." With a sense of growing resolve, Ethan thanked Sarah and hung up. He knew this wasn't just about his boat anymore. It had become a battle for his reputation and a fight against Karen's incessant need to control and harass. This wasn't about property value, it was about someone trying to intimidate him into submission. That evening, after receiving the news, Ethan went for a walk along the marina to clear his mind. The setting sun painted the water in golden hues, and the breeze carried the scent of salt and pine. As he stood by the edge, looking out at the boats, he realized that the community he had hoped to find peace in was being torn apart by Karen's antics. But Ethan was determined not to let her win. He had the law on his side, and he knew he would fight this to the end. The battle between Ethan and Karen had reached a crucial point. After weeks of back and forth, it was time for the courtroom showdown. Karen had filed a legal claim against him, accusing Ethan of harassment, threatening her with violence, and trying to intimidate her out of the neighborhood. As ridiculous as the accusations were, they were now part of the legal system. Ethan sat in the small but formal courtroom, glancing at his lawyer, Sarah Green. She sat beside him, her demeanor calm but sharp. She had been working tirelessly to gather evidence for this moment, and Ethan trusted her completely. The thought of the impending trial made his stomach churn, but he knew that it was necessary for him to clear his name. Karen, as expected, was seated across from him, looking every bit the part of the victim. She had her usual defensive posture, clipboard in hand, and her icy gaze fixated on him. Beside her, her lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Richard Blair, whispered to her. Ethan could feel the tension in the room building as the judge, Judge Spencer, called the proceedings to order. "Let's proceed with the opening statements," Judge Spencer said, his voice commanding attention. He turned to the prosecution, which in this case was Karen's lawyer, Blair. Blair stood up, straightening his tie before beginning. "Your Honor, we are here today because Mr. Pierce has engaged in continuous harassment and intimidation of my client, Mrs. McMillan. We will demonstrate that his actions, from threatening gestures to his refusal to comply with HOA rules, have created a toxic and hostile environment." Ethan rolled his eyes inwardly. It was a predictable line of defense, but one that Ethan knew wouldn't hold water once Sarah had the chance to present her evidence. When it was Sarah's turn to speak, she stood confidently. "Your Honor, we have clear evidence that these accusations are false. We have video footage of the interactions between my client and Mrs. McMillan, which demonstrate that Mr. Pierce was well within his rights to defend his property. Furthermore, we have several testimonies from neighbors who will corroborate Mr. Pierce's claim that Mrs. McMillan has been harassing him for weeks." Sarah's voice was steady, and as she presented the evidence, Ethan could feel the tide beginning to turn in his favor. He knew it wasn't going to be easy, but every piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of Karen's manipulation and lies. The day dragged on, with testimony from multiple witnesses, including some of the neighbors who had witnessed Karen's antics firsthand. Each one spoke of Karen's behavior, her constant complaints, her attempts to bully people into submission, and her tendency to escalate situations unnecessarily. As the trial wore on, Ethan began to feel cautiously optimistic. This wasn't just about winning, it was about exposing Karen for what she truly was, a woman who had used her position in the community to manipulate others, driven by her own prejudices and insecurities. By the end of the day, the court recessed, and Ethan and Sarah exchanged looks of quiet reassurance. The real work, however, was just beginning. A week later, the trial came to a dramatic conclusion. After deliberating for hours, Judge Spencer returned with a verdict that would change the dynamic of the neighborhood forever. Karen sat at the defense table, her hands tightly gripping her chair, her face a mask of anger and frustration. Ethan sat across from her, feeling a mixture of relief and anticipation. The entire courtroom fell silent as Judge Spencer spoke. "Mrs. McMillan," Judge Spencer began, his voice stern, "after reviewing all the evidence presented in this case, it is clear that the accusations brought against Mr. Pierce are baseless. There is insufficient evidence to support your claims of harassment and intimidation. In fact, the evidence suggests that you have repeatedly harassed Mr. Pierce and others in the neighborhood. Ethan felt a weight lift off his shoulders as the judge continued, "Furthermore, I find that your actions have been disruptive to the community and have caused unnecessary distress. Therefore, I am ruling in favor of Mr. Pierce." Karen's face turned crimson, her fists clenched in fury, but she said nothing. Her lawyer looked defeated, his shoulders slumped in resignation. The judge continued, "Mrs. McMillan, you are ordered to pay a fine and complete community service. You are also required to issue a formal apology to Mr. Pierce, and your membership in the HOA is hereby revoked." Ethan sat back in his chair, a quiet sense of triumph settling over him. He had won. But it wasn't just the victory that mattered, it was the message that had been sent to the community. No one would tolerate baseless accusations and harassment. As the court session adjourned, Ethan and Sarah exchanged a smile. They had been through a long, difficult battle, but it had paid off. Ethan stood, feeling a sense of accomplishment. The truth had prevailed, and Karen's reign of manipulation had come to an end. On his way out of the courtroom, Ethan noticed several of his neighbors in the hallway, offering nods of approval and congratulations. The community had witnessed Karen's downfall, and Ethan had proven that standing up for what was right could make a difference. As he left the courthouse, he knew that the victory was bittersweet. Karen's actions had caused pain and division, but now, with her out of the picture, the neighborhood could finally heal. And as for Ethan, he was ready to continue enjoying his peace, on his own terms.